Imagine a scene from history, not the kind we learn in textbooks, but the raw, unfiltered moments of agony and resistance. A woman, her bones broken, her body battered, yet her spirit unyielding. She is carried in a chair, barely alive, toward the flames. This isn't just a story of torture. It's a tale of defiance in the face of unspeakable cruelty. It's about survival, pain, and a society's desperation to break the will of one individual. This is the story of the rack, the chair, and the final journey to be burned alive. Medieval punishment was a terrifying spectacle. It wasn't enough for rulers to punish their enemies. It wasn't enough for them to simply kill. Torture was a statement. It was a lesson, and no punishment was more brutal than the rack. The rack was an instrument of pain, a contraption designed to stretch the body, dislocate joints, and break bones. The victim would be tied down, limbs pulled taut, and over time, the bones would snap. It was a slow, agonizing process. The pain was unbearable. For those who survived it, their bodies would be ruined forever. This was the fate that awaited many who stood in defiance of the authorities. Those who dared challenge the powers of the church, the state, or even the social order. The story of one such woman is a chilling reminder of the human capacity for cruelty and resilience. Her name was Joan of Arc, a name that echoes through history. But her story was not one of victory. It was a story of betrayal, suffering, and the will to survive even when it seemed impossible. Joan, the young peasant girl who had heard divine voices and led armies to victory, was ultimately captured by her enemies. She was put on trial for charges of heresy, witchcraft, and defying the very authority she had once stood against. Her trial was a political maneuver. Her enemies, fearing her influence, wanted to break her, to destroy her as a symbol. They sought not only to kill her, but to humiliate her in the most public, torturous way possible. The rack, breaking body and spirit. The rack was the perfect instrument for their purpose. They tied Joan to this horrifying device and stretched her body to its limits. The sound of cracking bones filled the air as her limbs were pulled in opposite directions. But it wasn't just physical pain they were trying to inflict. It was psychological torment. The rack was designed not just to hurt, but to break the spirit, to make the victim beg for mercy, to force them to abandon their beliefs. Joan, however, never faltered. She held on to her faith, her conviction that she was divinely chosen. She refused to recant, refused to admit to charges she knew were false. For this, they decided to take her to the next stage of suffering. From rack to chair. The journey to the fire. Once her bones had been broken, her body left ruined by the cruel torture of the rack, Joan was carried to the next phase of her punishment. She was no longer capable of walking. She had been reduced to a mere shadow of the vibrant young woman who had once led armies to victory. She was placed in a chair that would carry her toward her final destination, the stake. The chair was a symbol of helplessness. It was a reminder that she, once a mighty leader, was now completely powerless, reduced to a broken prisoner being paraded through the streets for all to see. And as the chair carried her to the execution site, the people, those who had once hailed her as a hero, now looked upon her with pity and disdain. The betrayal was complete. Her trial, her torture, and her final journey to the flames were the culmination of a political system that sought not just to punish, but to destroy. Not just to kill, but to erase. Joan's body may have been broken, but her spirit remained unyielding. Even as she was led to her final horrific fate, Joan's body was ravaged. The broken bones from the rack had left her fragile, barely able to sit up, let alone walk. She had endured unimaginable suffering, but despite the brutal treatment, Joan of Arc remained resolute, unwilling to renounce her beliefs. She had been humiliated, her dignity stripped away, yet her spirit refused to break. For those who had captured her, that was the most dangerous aspect of all. They had underestimated her will to fight. As she was carried in a chair to the execution site, she was paraded through the streets, a prisoner in her final moments. The people lined up, some out of curiosity, others with disdain, as Joan's once proud form was reduced to a spectacle of pain and punishment. They carried her as if she were no longer a person, but an object to be disposed of. Yet, even in this degradation, Joan did not beg for mercy. Her resolve shone brighter than the flames that would soon consume her. The crowd's reactions were a reflection of the deeply divided society of the time. For some, Joan was a hero, a martyr who had fought for God and country. For others, she was a traitor, a heretic deserving of her fate. The church, eager to silence her, had long ago condemned her. Her role in leading the French to victory against the English had made her a figurehead for the resistance, and that very resistance had made her dangerous to the status quo. Her execution was more than the end of a life. It was the deliberate suppression of an idea that threatened to unseat the power of the established church and monarchy. The flames that awaited her were not merely a method of execution, they were meant to erase her, to burn her, not just physically but symbolically. The fire would consume her body, her legacy, and the very essence of who she had been. Yet the fire did something they didn't expect. It gave birth to a legend. The last moments of Joan's life. Prayer amidst the flames. As Joan was tied to the stake, she faced the final moment of her life. The flames began to rise, licking the air, heating the surrounding area. Joan, who had been silent through the long trial and agonizing torture, spoke her final words aloud. She called upon God, praying fervently as the fire began to engulf her. "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus!" she cried, her voice carrying through the crowd. In those final moments, Joan's faith became her shield. The flames that tore at her flesh could not touch the conviction that burned even brighter within her heart. Her body, though weakened and broken by torture, was no match for the strength of her spirit. She remained steadfast, never once wavering in her belief. For Joan, this death was not one of surrender, but one of ultimate defiance. She knew that the flames could not destroy her soul. The aftermath, a martyr's legacy. When Joan's body was consumed by the flames, the crowd watched in stunned silence. It was a moment that would echo throughout history, not as the final act of a heretic, but as the tragic conclusion of a hero's journey. Despite the efforts to silence her, Joan's death only amplified her message. Her sacrifice stirred the hearts of many. The church, in its desire to erase her, had inadvertently created a martyr. Joan's legacy would not die with her body. It would only grow stronger. The English, who had been so eager to see Joan's death, began to realize the gravity of what had just occurred. The act of executing her had not quelled the spirit of resistance, but had emboldened it. The French, inspired by her courage and faith, rallied to continue the fight for freedom. Joan's death was not the end of her influence, but the beginning of a movement. Her name would live on in the hearts of those who believed in her cause. It was only years later that the Catholic Church, which had condemned her as a heretic, would recognize Joan of Arc as a saint. She was posthumously absolved of the charges brought against her, and the process of her canonization began. The very institution that had sought to destroy her now embraced her as one of its own. Joan of Arc had become a symbol not just of courage and faith, but of the power of redemption. Her journey from the rack to the flames, from broken bones to triumphant martyrdom, serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. In the face of overwhelming cruelty, Joan did not yield. She did not allow her torment to define her. Instead, she used it as a platform to declare her truth. And in doing so, she became an eternal symbol of strength and defiance. The final lesson: the unbreakable spirit. Joan's story is not just about the brutal death she endured, but about the strength she displayed in her final moments. In a time when women had little power, when religious and political authorities wielded unimaginable influence. Joan defied all odds. She was tortured, condemned, and executed, but she never once allowed her captors to break her spirit. Her story is a reminder that no matter the pain, no matter the suffering, there is power in holding on to what you believe. Joan's body may have been destroyed by fire, but her spirit, her message of faith, courage, and defiance, lives on. It is a message that transcends time, a message that reminds us that the greatest strength lies not in the body, but in the soul. Joan's legacy is not one of defeat, but of victory, the victory of a soul unyielding to the forces of oppression. Her story challenges us to look beyond the physical pain and suffering and recognize the resilience that exists within us all. For even in the face of death, the human spirit can remain unbroken,